Thank you, Mr. Durham. That's not part of the report. It is a lot of what I've heard from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. One of my colleagues from California said, I don't know what we're doing here. And what we're doing here is going through this very damning report. The FBI has failed many times over the years that you investigated them. I'd like to ask, did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without speaking to the people who provided the information?
Yes.
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane on a Sunday, only 3 days after reviewing the information?
Yes.
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without any significant review of its own intelligence database?
Yes.
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without interviewing the essential witnesses?
Yes.
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without using any of the standard analytical tools typically employed in evaluating intelligence?
Yes.
Did the FBI consider the possibility that it was the target?
It didn't appear so to me from the evidence.
And so I'm curious if you could tell me, because I'm not a prosecutor, some of my colleagues here are, but the average American is not. Can you tell us why and under what motivation would a prosecutorial agency act in such a way where it willfully ignores multiple instances of exculpatory evidence throughout the course of its investigation? Because I just don't understand that.
That, in my experience, that is not the norm. That's not how the FBI performs. In this particular case, as is reflected in the report, there appear to be persons in the FBI who were central to opening the investigation that had rather strong views concerning then candidate Trump.
And we've heard in your report that you reference confirmation bias. And a lot of times, or sometimes, we see that the investigators, perhaps the FBI investigators, they have a confirmation bias because they want a guilty outcome. They want to find the suspect guilty. But we did not see that to be the case for Hillary Clinton. So it makes me think that based on the investigation into the conduct and the continuous disregard for duty, there was obviously a special motivation to find this suspect, Donald Trump and his campaign, guilty above anyone else. Would you agree?
I can speak to what the facts show, as documented in the report. Again, people draw their reasonable inferences, conclusions from those facts with an honest reading of the report.
If either you or someone on your team willfully ignored exculpatory evidence, refused to interview key witnesses, favored one suspect over another, or did any or all of the things that the FBI did during Crossfire Hurricane, would you face repercussions?
There ought to be repercussions. If that ever happened in connection with an agent that I was working with and I knew about it, the first thing would be to report it to the court, and the probably second thing would be to report it to their superiors. The third thing would be sure that that agent never worked with me again.
I appreciate that. I also appreciate your remarks earlier in your open testimony where you said, my colleagues and I carried out our work in good faith, with integrity, in the spirit of following the facts wherever they lead, without fear or favor. I believe you did that. I'm disappointed in some of my colleagues that have said disparaging remarks about you. I've seen very few that actually talk about your report. They want to talk about everything else, which tells me you're onto something. I'd also yield the balance of my time to the chairman.
I appreciate the gentleman for yielding. So Danchenko is the primary subsource. A few years before he does this work, he was investigated by the FBI for espionage. Is that right, Mr. Durham?
Correct.
And that case was halted because the FBI thought he left the country, right?
Correct.
Had he left the country?
No.
Where was he living?
He remained living in the place that he was living when they opened the investigation.
Right here in D.C., right?
Yeah.
He hadn't left anywhere. He's right here in D.C., and we're going to stop this. And then they go hire him, use the tax money of the people I get the privilege of representing to pay this guy who they obviously knew was a Russian spy. They hire him, who's the source of all the false information. Is that true?
They paid him. They hired him, and they paid him.
Couple $100,000, if I recall, right?
It's over $200,000.
Yeah, and then this guy is hanging out with Dolan, Charles Dolan, who's a buddy of the Clintons, who's also a source for the false dossier that was used to spy on an American citizen. He's hanging out with Dolan. In fact, don't they meet on a park bench somewhere in Arlington, Virginia on New Year's Day?
New Year's Day, middle of the day.
I mean, this is straight out of the movies, right? And the FBI says, but we're not going to talk to Charles Dolan. I mean, this is two of the dumbest things I've ever heard of. They won't talk. They pay a guy who's a Russian spy, who's the source of the dossier. The other source of the dossier is Charles Dolan, who meets with that guy on a park bench in Arlington, and they don't want to interview him. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. But that's what Comey's FBI did. And they're still doing this kind of baloney because Mr. D'Antuono told us so, running operations, running investigations out of headquarters instead of assigning a U.S. attorney, a job you did for a long time and did very well. That is a huge problem. And your report, that's why your report's valuable. Gentlemen, I yield back to the gentleman who was out of time, and we now recognize the gentleman from, Mr. Craig. I'm sorry, right here. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for 5.
Thank you. And thank you for coming to testify today. I know it's not a comfortable experience, obviously. And clearly the questions have exposed that we have many areas of disagreement across the aisle, but I am relieved that we have no disagreement about one of the fundamental conclusions of your report, that it was incumbent upon the FBI to open some form of investigation when presented with evidence that a presidential candidate and his associates are either coordinating campaign efforts with a hostile nation or being manipulated by such a hostile nation. And that is a fundamental conclusion, right? Some form of investigation was necessary.
Right. I mean, the FBI, when they receive information, disinformation, other information, they almost always have some obligation to assess that information.
Sure.
That's what the assessment is about.
Sure. So we've established over the course of questions that the current Attorney General, Merrick Garland, allowed you to run your investigation, I think you said, independently and without interference, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you've talked about the thoroughness of your investigation as you performed it over the course of 4.5 years, $6.5 million, hundreds of FBI agents, 6 million pages of documents, not hundreds of FBI agents, hundreds of personnel working with you.
That would not be accurate, but.
Okay. Well, you also had the benefit of prior investigations, including the Mueller report.
Correct.
The 2019 Department of Justice Office of Inspector General's report, which concurred with you that there was an obligation to investigate, right?
Yes.
Although it disagreed with you about precisely the form, correct?
I think it's more than form, but we had disagreement in that regard.
And there was also a 2020 Senate Select Committee report on intelligence run by Senator Rubio that affirmed that Russia, in fact, had sought to interfere in our elections to benefit the Trump campaign, correct?
The report, I don't remember if Senator Rubio was the chair at the time or not.
Okay, but
I don't think he was.
Okay. So with all of that, you and Attorney General Barr had both been appointed by President Trump, right?
I'm sorry, can you just repeat that one again?
You and Attorney General Barr had both been appointed to serve at that time by President Trump, correct?
I had been nominated by President Trump, and I believe that Mr. Barr was nominated to be Attorney General by Mr. Trump.
Okay. And the AG Barr appointed you to be special counsel, right?
He appointed me as special counsel, yes.
Okay. But in contrast to the independence and lack of interference, which you have noted on multiple occasions that has been performed by Merrick Garland, AG Barr had a very active role in your investigation. And I just wanted to mention a couple instances. First of all, shortly after your appointment, you and AG Barr both traveled overseas and met with Italian officials who provided some allegations with respect to criminal activity by the former president, correct?
We traveled well, this is outside the report, so I'm not sure that I'm authorized to talk about it, but we went to Italy to try to pursue leads involving a particular mysterious professor.
Okay. So you don't mention in your report those allegations of misconduct concerning the former president, correct? It's not in your report. You didn't include that information in your report, right?
Okay. Which information?
About your trip to Italy with AG Barr?
No, I don't know why I would include that in a report.
The day the Inspector General's report was published, you issued a press release saying that you didn't agree with some of his conclusions. Did AG Barr ask you to issue that press release?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Who did?
I made that decision. Do you want to know why or no?
Actually, I wanted to know first, can you identify any other occasion which a special counsel has released a press statement questioning another special counsel or inspector general's report? Can you name one?
Yeah, I don't know of any.
Okay.
They may have, but I don't know about it.
Okay, so did you communicate with AG Barr about your press statement before his was released the same day, or was that just a fantastic coincidence?
Did I communicate with Attorney General Barr about what?
About your press release questioning the IG's report.
I told Attorney General Barr, I didn't ask his permission, I told him that I was going to do it.
Okay. One more question. There's been mention of the resignation of one of your colleagues, Nora Danahy, in the fall of 2020. Isn't it true that she resigned in protest concerning pressure by AG Barr for you to deliver an interim report or other results before the 2020 presidential election?
You'd have to ask Ms. Danahy that. I'm not going to discuss the internal discussions in our group.
Or we could Google it. Thank you. I yield back.
It's a pretty good source of information.
Sure is. The gentlelady yields back, the gentleman from Oregon. We actually expected it. We were surprised it took them that long to put out this letter about these guys. But you'll get to hear from these individuals today, these brave Americans who are willing to come forward. Understand what the Durham report said. The FBI failed in its fundamental mission of fidelity to the law. They didn't follow the law. These three guys who are going to come testify today, their conscience, their duty to the Constitution compelled them to come forward in fidelity to the law. And you'll get to hear from them here in less than an hour.
Mr. Chairman.
I hear, and then I'll come back up. We'll take a couple more.
I know you and your colleagues have said that there's corruption in the leadership of the FBI, but I think that that memo targeting Catholics in the Latin Mass came from the Richmond field office. So, isn't it possible that maybe this is a little more widespread than just?
I still think that I think the vast majority, and our investigation shows the vast majority of the agents are good people doing their job. The Richmond field office obviously had a problem. How 5 people could sign off on that memo? How the chief division counsel, supposedly some lawyer who went to law school and probably had a course on the Constitution, could sign off on that memo astounds me. But they did. Now, the good news is a whistleblower brought it to our attention and the FBI has rescinded it. But I always ask the question, if it hadn't been brought to our attention, if it wasn't for the brave whistleblower, would they really have rescinded it? I don't know. I'd like to think they would. So, again, we think the vast majority of agents are doing a good job. It is problems, as Mr. Gates pointed out, and as our whistleblowers told us in their interviews, the problem is in the Washington field office here and at the